Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask Your Representative, the show where we talk to local elected officials. My name is Trevor and I'm from the marketing department at the Clarkston Independence District Library. Our guest today is the mayor of Clarkston, Eric Haven. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. It's really good to have you at ITV. How are you?
Thank you. Glad to be here, really.
Awesome. I really appreciate you giving us a little bit of time today. So we're changing up the format a little bit today, and it's just going to be you and me. We're going to just have a conversation about things that are going on, in the city and things that are coming up for 2020.
Excellent. Love to talk about it.
Yeah, I understand Clarkston's your favorite subject.
Oh, it is.
Rightly so.
Well, one of my favorite subjects. A few others.
So, for maybe some residents who just moved into Clarkston, would you share a little bit about your background, your professional history, and kind of how you came to know and love Clarkston as you do now?
Sure. Well, I married a hometown girl. That's the way that happened. I met my wife Nancy at Central Michigan in 1968. She, with her family, moved here in 1964, and we moved into a house on Main Street, an 1865 Civil War house.
Wow.
And which is
still there.
Very much so. And our kids and grandkids are in that house now. And so it is kind of what Clarkston is. Property sort of changed hands many times, and family, which is really wonderful. It makes the village what it is. It's very, very quaint, very intimate, I think, and it's a great resource for our whole region, frankly.
Absolutely. So, you haven't always been in public office. You were elected in only 2018, 2 years ago. What was your life like, your professional life, before you decided to run for office?
Well, it's been varied. I became familiar with Clarkston city government a long time ago when I was a young father. My father-in-law, Dick Weiss, who lived in that house on Main Street, was in city government, and I learned a little bit about it from him. He encouraged me to get involved, and so I served on council over 30 years on and off.
Wow.
So I'm very familiar with sitting at that desk. But it wasn't until 2018 that I decided to run, for mayor, because I thought there were some significant issues that needed to be addressed in town. The primary one was protecting our zoning.
Gotcha.
Preservation is a big issue in this town, not just in terms of the historic district, but also in terms of our environment, our zoning gives us our stability, our structure, which is really important. It may be a boring subject in a civics book, but I say basically zoning is like your mom told you, it's a place for everything and everything in its place. And when you have order, then you have a good environment,
So were there talk of different types of businesses or construction, that were going on in 2018, and you were kind of worried about them changing the feel of Clarkston? What type of zoning issues, if you have any on top of your head, were concerning to you at the time? Or is it just that maybe the rules weren't in place to kind of keep Clarkston the way that it is?
The rules are in place, but they're always challenged,
okay.
By those who have special interests and so on, and that's not wrong. We appreciate developers, and we'll always do that. But when you have an intact historic district like we do, we really have a unique jewel here for preservation. And so our neighborhoods were primarily, you look at the map, I think maybe the stats are 60%. Residential, but that's deceiving because probably another 25% of that's water, here in our town.
Right.
So we have maybe 3% commercial district. So we're a residential 1832 mill village with a viable and really dynamic downtown now, and it's been through different stages over time. There was a time. Robert from Rudy's used to say, we used to have a parking problem in town. That's when no one came, It wasn't,
not anymore.
It wasn't dynamically viable in the sense of commercial in the day, in many times in the past. But today it is very vibrant and a destination with all of the pluses and minuses that go with that, But Clarkston's a wonderful place to live, and that has been my experience with my wife for the last 45 years here.
That's great. I mean, I've only worked in the city for 3 years, but I work in the township, but I'm in the city all the time, and I love it. It's a great place. It really is a great place to live, work and play. So I can't echo that enough. Obviously, being elected changes your perspective on things. Not only how the city works, how government works. Have there been any perspectives for you that have changed, or things that have evolved for you since you were elected, now that you're working even more closely, as an elected official?
It's interesting. A public election in Clarkston has become more, what shall I say, what's the word? Perhaps intense, maybe. In the last few years, there was a day in which whoever would agree to sit on a council seat or be mayor was it. There was not really any contest for it.
Okay.
But I think with the world being what it is, many things are contested today in our world. I think our village reflects that, as well. I think expectations for city government, village government, perhaps are overemphasized because their government as a whole is reflected upon on a national level and really world level even. But we're just a very small little village, and the mantra is we became a city to remain a village, and I think that's a very viable perspective. So we have a great city government. We have a city manager who I admire highly. That's one of the reasons I ran. It's a strong city manager, a form of government. So he has all the really hard work to do. I get to just meet people and try to run interference for him. I tell him, Jonathan and his very small staff, very efficient, which really was exemplified by the fact that he virtually had this new city hall built around him. As they were working there, they were not going to move out. They were going to work there, and so they went through the logistics of making all that happen. And it's a beautiful new place. If you haven't been there, I encourage you to go. We
were actually down there. Adrian and I, our stage manager, Adrian and I were down there a little bit ago, and it looks really nice. Absolutely, it's also where it was like a DPW was also there as well.
Correct. It's a DPW garage as well.
Absolutely. So you are notoriously easy to get a hold of and easy to talk to,
really?
which is fantastic for an elected official. And I'm sure people reach out to you with their concerns, their questions. As you're talking to residents, have there been any themes that have come up, or things that you hear over and over again, or either issues or maybe positives, also that you hear from our voters?
I think issues are opportunities always, and I always, I don't know who was it that said, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer, kind of thing, because you learn, and you need to be attentive to that. So I think don't get me wrong, I don't really have any enemies. It's not that kind of place. But
I can see that. You're a really nice guy.
Nevertheless, those who are critical need to be listened to.
Sure.
Because whether they have the whole truth or not can be argued, but there's usually a germ of truth, in everything people say. So it gives us a heads up, and we need to be attentive to those things. But in terms of issues, of course, one that's been very much public of late is parking. You know, and I've said many times I really feel like parking is a symptom of our success in a way, of our attractiveness. Clarkston is a destination, and that's a beautiful thing. It really is a wonderful thing. But just like I said, like Manhattan, Manhattan has a parking problem. Would you like their property values? So it's two sides of the same coin. Sure. Whenever you're a destination or you're desirable, people want to come there. So you will have congestion and so on. But how you invest in that has to be sensitive, and it has to be future looking as well, because we don't know how soon this will actually happen, but maybe in the next 10 years we'll have autonomous cars and have no parking problem at all.
Right.
It'd be like Kit in the old TV series, you whistle for your car, and it comes to pick you
Wouldn't
up.
That be nice?
But we have Uber and other things now today.
Yeah.
And I think the worst case, parking-wise, we just take that one issue.
Sure.
I've seen aerial views of Depot Park when the Magic Bus is there in concert. It is wall-to-wall people. And somehow they get there, and somehow they get home,
right.
And we've not changed anything in terms of our parking. And that's, I think a compliment to our citizenry, because they love the fact that people love their town,
sure,
want to come here, and so they'll let them park on their front berm, kind of thing, during the concert, and then all of a sudden it disappears.
Right.
I grew up in Traverse City in my childhood, and the Cherry Festival was a good example of that in Traverse City. Where this town swelled from 20,000 to 1 million people, for the Cherry Festival. How did they get there? I don't know, but they figure it out.
Sure.
And so we don't need to do a whole lot of capital investing, to create high-rise parking decks or anything of that nature in this little village, because people do figure it out. And neither would we want to, because of the aesthetics and so on and preservation of history here.
Let's stay on the topic of parking just because we're kind of talking about it now, as residents know, last year the city instituted the lot at Washington as a paid lot from at first I think 11, and then they pushed it to 4 o'clock, and so it didn't hit the lunch rush. Can you just talk a little bit about the revenue, kind of how that's doing, and maybe where that money is being invested?
That's really a boon for our town, I think. We sort of discovered it. The previous mayor really came up with that idea, and I support him wholly in that venture. It's a way for us to pay for infrastructure here in our town without raising taxes. And we've done 2 things I think are prudent in this case. One is that once you have structure in place, I always say, then you can manage the structure. But if you don't have structure, then you have chaos, So we have structure. And what we did in response to the business community, many of whom were hurt by the parking lot there originally, the breakfast and lunch crowd kind of thing, if you will, and then the commercial in between those hours, they were hurt by that. And so what we did was we took the structure, changed the timing on it, made it amicable, to everyone, and I think that really turned out well. But the one project in that lot has been very highly successful. The last numbers, we've been through it now for over a year, $75,000 into the city,
Wow.
for that. And we've used that money for doing things like repairing the Walton intersection and Miller Road from Glen Burnie out to Main Street. We've repaved that, and we'll do more and more of that kind of thing. So I sort of say that we can do in Clarkston what really the state of Michigan has trouble doing. That's we can take care of our roads. They fell into disrepair after the downturn in '08 and following. They were in good shape then, but we went through some attrition. So on, we know that it's there, but we're keeping up on it. And if you compare us to many communities, even surrounding us, our roads are in pretty good shape, and we'll continue to get better.
I think I plugged this on the last episode, but I can't wait until there's a fix at the intersection of M15 and Clarkston Road, the spot in front of the repair shop that's always flooded.
I agree.
I cannot wait. And I know it's on Jonathan Smith's mind because in his emails, he mentions hey, we're looking for something permanent, but I can't wait on that one because there's no Band-Aid big enough to fix that little intersection.
It is the high school intersection.
Yeah, it's
Main
crazy
Street.
busy. Yeah,
very
tons
busy.
of traffic.
There's great hope for that, though. I think we've all wanted that. There's a drainage issue there, which has to be addressed before we fix the pavement and so on. But Jonathan has even offered to the township, county that owns it.
Right.
That intersection.
It's on a city road, I have to say.
Yeah,
it's not in the city.
I have to keep my municipality.
It's not. You're right. My bad.
It's county, and they want to fix it, but it's not on their near-term agenda. But Jonathan has suggested that if we cooperate in that, could it be moved forward in the schedule? And they said absolutely. So there's ways for government interfacing to work well for all of us. So.
Imagine government working well for us, isn't it? And it's always
That's
on
what it's supposed to be.
It's always on the local level. You guys do it the best. Could you talk a little bit generally about the city finances?
Sure.
I know you have a fund balance. Could you just talk a little bit about kind of how the city's doing overall?
The city's really doing well. We are, again, a small city, village, $800,000 budget, round number. And we just came through our audit for the, is it 19? I always have to think about what year it is because it's fiscal. It's 18-19 audit.
Gotcha.
I think it's going to be 19-20 now.
Okay.
But Arena Edmonds, our auditor, gave us a great gold star. It's a great looking audit. We have about a 30%. I give 30% and $30,000 confused, but somewhere between the two of that $800,000 is our fund balance, and we can go down. And we've been counseled by MML and SEMCOG and so on that municipalities are okay down to 16%, in terms of a fund balance. But we like to keep ours a little healthier than that, just be able to respond to things. But again, wanting to put that money to work as we can. And there's upcoming projects which are going to, give us opportunity to use some of that money, for doing things of real benefit.
Is there any that you want to talk about now?
Sure. The gazebo in Depot Park, it's a romantic, nostalgic, historic place that was put there by Barb Thompson in honor of her husband, Ted Thompson, in years past. Very dynamic people and very important to our village. But that's been a sort of a central, icon really in our village. But it's falling into disrepair, and it needs to be reconstructed. And so we're going to go about doing that. This is really one that's on the front burner right now, because weddings and activities are coming in the park. We want to be ready for them. And so we're going to relocate. The plan is to relocate it just a little bit further north, instead of northeast, down the mill race.
Okay.
Just a little closer to this the sidewalk, and then lower it and put a ramp, an ADA ramp into it, so it becomes ADA compliant. Which really then is a lead-in to the other things that are going on around it. We did a fundraising campaign last year to raise matching funds for a DNR grant. And the DNR grant opportunity, that we were counseled in this, if we went for $50,000, they were going to give away a lot of those out of the DNR trust fund. So our chances would be good at that level, and it turned out to be the case. We were awarded a $50,000 grant after raising a matching fund, so we're looking around roughly $100,000 to be spent in gifts in kind as well as in cash and pledges and that sort of thing. So we're waiting for the legislature to actually fund that, that grant. But we expect them to do it. Times are good, and the trust fund is very much there, for that purpose. So that being the case, we'll be looking at putting ADA pathways and other grounds kind of provisions in the park. For example, fall places around the playground equipment, for the kids and so on. It's now mulch. Some of that might become foam material or something of that nature. Some of those materials, porous, semi-permeable. Membranes, that kind of thing. So we're excited about those things. We started a little campaign for a picnic pavilion in the park at the end of last year, and people have really been interested in that, and they've shown it with their contributions. So these things just keep going on, and because people love Clarkston.
They're so generous. Absolutely. The community is just endlessly generous with things.
It's a pedestrian community, we can walk wherever. We're 1/2 square mile. I always I compare us to the township and Pat Kittle, and I'm very empathetic and sympathetic to his issues of roads and so on, because townships are 36 square miles. Every township is a 36 square mile plot, in the state of Michigan. We're 1/2 square mile. So we're 1/72nd of the township. and that's really why we became a city, because we could become self-governing. We could sort of protect ourselves from that massive, other special interests and stuff that are out there, and really protect the little jewel we have,
You mentioned earlier about the refurbishment of City Hall. Could you talk a little bit about the funding source for that, and maybe the deadline for when you expect that to be finished?
Yes, it's virtually, building-wise, it's pretty much finished now with the exception of the driveway out in front, and that'll be an issue of trying to find that. It's a little bit outside of our budget, the driveway itself, to get trucks in and out for the DPW. We thought that the existing pavement, the reason for that being outside the budget, is we thought the existing pavement would be all right, redeemable, but it wasn't, as it turned out. It began to show its lack of depth, if you will, during the construction process. So we do have to replace that. So that'll be on the docket. But that's really a good news story, because there was over many years an awareness that we had to do something with that building. It was deteriorating, so the proposal that was brought to us by Sam Morocco and Jerry Carter, a local contractor and designer, was that they would really contribute to that project in a very generous way to help us complete it. And so what we did was, not wanting to raise taxes or to dip into our coffers any further, what we did was borrow from ourselves. And that's an interesting story, which new technology has made possible in our day and age, because as I experienced in our own home, we have a home that was built in the 20s and had cast iron plumbing in it, and that cast iron will last 60 years. So I talked to HRC, our engineering firm, about that, and they said, yeah, really, what you experienced in your home, which was cameraing in that system, to look and see what's actually down there. Like they can camera your heart, they can camera everything these days. They can keep up on the infrastructure, and so you do preventative maintenance constantly on your infrastructure, and so you don't have to have funds in escrow for a catastrophe per se. if it was a massive catastrophe, something like some of the other communities have experienced in the past, the state and federal government have to get involved, to help. We never could put aside the kind of resources for that. But ours are maintained well. They're preventatively maintained well, and so we could borrow from our own resources, pay ourselves back at 1%, which is what required, and actually build that city hall for under $300,000, which was really a nice price, for
Absolutely.
that. Got a beautiful facility.
A long time coming too.
It's past overdue, way past overdue.
Let's change gears a little bit and talk about the master plan that,
Sure.
that the city's begun to talk about and discuss. What type of elements are you looking to include? What type of issues are you looking to deal with in the plan as you begin to think about it?
Sure, it's a very detailed discussion, obviously, but there are some generalizations which I can make for you. The master plan was done. It was past due probably by 9 years or something like that when we actually did it. But the state requires it every 5 years for us to update our master plan. We had one, but as so many plans go, they go in the filing cabinet, and they weren't active. Our master plan, though, that's not the case. But when I became aware that grant money was available from the state for a park, which was my first interest before I became mayor, I sought out how we get that grant money, and the first thing they said, you have to have a master plan for your recreation. So we did a recreation plan first, okay, and got that done, and then it raised everybody's awareness about our master plan needing updating. So we went through that process with Carlisle Wortman, our city planner. In both cases, they helped us a great deal out of Ann Arbor. And anyway, we came up with basically 3 categories, and I want to say there's like 30 task lists, that go with these 3 categories. But the categories are basically neighborhoods, quality neighborhoods, a viable downtown, and the third one is interesting when we think about it. It's kind of a new term in the vernacular, is placemaking. Placemaking is a movement around the world where idyllic places, if you will, are recognized as such, or not so. Maybe something is not, desirable, and they want to make it desirable. So they will invest in a particular area to make it a destination, for people. They just love to be there, hang out, read a book, have a Coke, whatever the case might be, And so we think Clarkston has all the raw materials certainly for placemaking, and we can even make it better, here. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely, great. Well, we'll look for that in the future. Let's now talk about something that is a favorite, topic in town, and that's the Historic Commission and historic planning.
Okay.
And just, what makes Clarkston unique. Talk a little about the efforts underway with regard to the National Register of Historic Places and kind of how that's being reinvigorated now.
Well, just to give you a little bit of historical perspective, a very dynamic and wise group of people years ago. I always appreciate people who have vision. Saw Clarkston as something that really be preserved, and it was really threatened in the '80s because MDOT, had the charter really to make transportation as efficient as possible, and so movement from point A to point B without interference, was really their objective, and so on. But it caused some problems, and especially for Clarkston, the plan was to put 4 lanes through Clarkston, which would have wiped the town out. We would not have a historic district, and so on, had that happened. And so local citizens realized that one way to prevent that from happening would be to form a historic district around what is legitimately an 1832 intact contiguous historic district. Many of the houses in that district were built with the lumber from the original mill back in 1832. So it's a beautiful prime piece of real estate, but without protection, it can be assaulted both by infrastructure improvement as well as development and so on that's not seasoned and understand the environment. So in the 80s, those people formed a district, and they basically formed the district by identifying houses on all 4 corners of the district, which should be researched and entered into the National Register of Historic Places. And that was done back then, and it really prohibited MDOT from putting 4 lanes through town. So that preserved it for a while, and then those people got older and tireder, and so on, and it sort of lay dormant for a while. But we've realized in the last few years how much we really need to reinvigorate this thing, and finish the job they started. And so we formed, with Nancy Moon being chairman, a study committee this day to evaluate the remainder of the homes within that district. So, ideally speaking, we have all of those homes on the National Register of Historic Places as individuals, as opposed to the collection. The collection's there now, in the district. The Historic District Commission has the charter of protecting that, and I think with citizenry manning those positions, there's always a developing learning curve on what it's all about.
Sure.
And I think in the past, sometimes it's been viewed as punitive rather than helpful. But I think that the desire these days by everyone involved, myself included, is to make this a really helpful commission to talk with property owners early on in their process and say, here's how we can preserve the beauty, of your home in its historical context, and so on. And we're talking about facades. People can do what they want on the inside of their home, but on the outside, we want it, when you drive down Main Street or whatever, to keep that frontage and everything pristine like it was in years past.
Sure. Definitely important. It's hard to imagine Clarkston downtown to be just eradicated, and even your family home probably would have completely disappeared had the road been widened.
Yes, it's very close to the road. And that brings us to another subject, which is you ask about issues these days. One of them is large trucks, gravel haulers on our main
barrel
street.
down M15 downtown.
And we're working hard on this right now, not only with our own people, but with other political officials. We've met with Rosemary Bayer, our state senator.
Sure.
We've met with Alyssa Slotkin from the national government, and Andrea Schroeder, our state rep. We'd also like to get with our state senators as well on this and just make them aware of what's going on. But we made several presentations, and we understand that M15, our main street, is a state trunk line.
Right.
It's constructed using Act 51 monies and so on, and maintained with that. And so it's understandable that it's a viable truck route. But it's also a very sensitive pedestrian community now, and so those two things can be in opposition. And we've never seen a whole lot of tragedy until the last couple of years, where
until last year.
the gravel hauler plowed into the dentist's office, stopped 10 feet from a person in the dental chair. It was amazing.
Absolutely.
And then more recently, a truck coming in at high speed from the north, ended up in the ditch right alongside our most recent pedestrian sidewalk that we just put in place there. So it just
near Brioni, if I remember.
Right, near Brioni's. It wiped out the patio on Brioni's and sprayed, lawn furniture everywhere. Had there been people there, it would have been. So our appeal to everyone involved is no one's been hurt or killed yet, but we don't want to wait till that happens to begin to work on the problem. So we know it's got legal, got bureaucratic, a lot of issues involved there, but we're kind of looking for a reprieve. State help us until we can figure out the solutions to these. But we don't think we're alone. We think there's a lot of other villages, especially with fix the roads being the mantra. In our state these days, that large trucking companies and really big lobbies, for those trucking companies have power. In government. So we're a small voice crying in the wilderness in a way here, but we think there's a lot of us, and perhaps if we get in chorus with each other and then engage with our state and national officials, we can be heard.
Absolutely. So in your conversations with them, did they give you any indication of steps that can be taken? Is it a matter of reducing the speed, maybe during all times of day or during the busiest times of day, or if, as you say, they can't restrict traffic, are there any solutions that they offered? Because it is a state highway.
Yeah,
the speed limit is already relatively low.
Pardon me?
And the speed limit is already relatively low through downtown.
It is. Whether they maintain it or not is another question. Sure, some people have said it's sometimes 0 and sometimes 70, through there. So it's one of those things. It's obviously a hyperbole. But nevertheless, there's issues, and there's things that can be done.
Okay.
Our engineering firm, Hubble, Roth & Clark, has suggested things like as simple as striping for bike lanes, putting parking back on that street. It was there at one time, whether MDOT would approve. But again, everything's under MDOT's jurisdiction, what we would do. There's talk about medians, in the center, because it is fairly wide. You could do some narrow medians through there, which is slow traffic.
Okay.
And also even roundabouts. Roundabouts are becoming more and more prevalent in our country, And so there are a couple locations potentially would be outside the historic district would be Middle Lake Road, where it's a crossroad, and safety to school is a big issue these days. And also maybe up by Bluegrass or something coming off the highway, you know, just to give some slowing,
absolutely,
you know, and inhibition to the truckers. We don't know why they come through Clarkston for sure. Some people have suggested they're trying to evade the scales on I-75 sometimes, you know.
Oh,
so why do truckers go through small towns when they could be on a freeway somewhere? There's got to be reasons.
I guess I always assumed that they wanted to be on Dixie, but I never. They could use Dixie as a bypass, as you suggest.
Well, they could. We're like a town with a parenthesis around it. We have Dixie Highway on the west, and we have Sashabaw on the east. You know, and even though Sashabaw doesn't go past maybe, you know, as a 4-lane, you know, nevertheless, a whole lot of traffic could be diverted around this little 2-lane mill village.
Absolutely.
You know, so.
Just another good reminder for people when we're walking around town to be extra careful. And while it says that, you know, that everyone needs to stop for pedestrians, don't assume they're going to before you take that leaf across from the, you know, from Honcho. Is there anything else that you want to talk about today before we finish up? If anyone has any questions about, you know, anything going on in the city, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I think probably contact the city. You know,
we'll put that number up on the bottom of the screen.
I do liberally give out my own home phone number and that kind of thing, my cell number rather. So I'm easy to get a hold of, and I love talking to people. You know, and spend some time at the bakery and then so. Just engaging people. But like I said before, I want to hear ideas, pro and con, because out of those you can glean many times solutions, you know, that you wouldn't have otherwise thought about, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Know, process. So, no, and we're in this together. We all have the same objective. We want a peaceful, quiet. I call Clarkston home. One of the people when I was running for election 2 years or a year and a half ago now. Said that she works in Troy and she gets off at the exit, and when she comes into town, she takes a big deep breath because she's home, you know, and so that's
the
why
air is cleaner.
Clarkston is home to, like I say, we're primarily residential community.
Sure.
You know, so it's a bedroom community, you know, and we love that, and so that's what really all the work over time has been gone to kind of keep it nice and peaceful. A nice hometown, Americana, you know. Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, we really appreciate your time today, Mr. Mayor, and we'll see you around town.
Excellent.
And we want to also thank you for watching today's episode of Ask Your Representative. I want to shout out special thanks to Matt and Stefan from ITV, who always help us with the show, and also our stage manager, Adrian, who always makes the show possible for me as well. We'll see you next time on Ask Your Rep.